When Yu Sheng had first entered the state of demonization, he had not been able to control the incredibly powerful demonic will, and would thus become extremely violent. But as he grew stronger, his control over his power grew greater as well, and things became different than before. After all, he had reached the peak of the saint level. When Yu Sheng had first entered the state of demonization, he had not been able to control the incredibly powerful demonic will, and would thus become extremely violent. But as he grew stronger, his control over his power grew greater as well, and things became different than before. After all, he had reached the peak of the saint level. Black demonic light filled the underground palace, and the sounds of demonic will seemed to curl through the air. Countless demonic phantoms appeared, looking to Yu Sheng as their master. At the same time, demonic armor spread out over his body. It seemed to have been forged out of dragon scales. A terrible, black demon dragon wrapped around him as if it were a demon child that he was raising. The dragon was terrifying in the extreme. When it looked at Dou Zhao, he could feel an incredible sense of danger. The dragon's eyes seemed to have life in them. This was the creation of an incredibly powerful demon. This was what the demon dragon had given to Yu Sheng. He could clearly remember that before he left, the demon dragon had pulled out his own dragon spirit, causing him unthinkable pain, and then given the power to him. This had made the dragon extremely weak. Yu Sheng did not know why he had done this. Wouldn't it have been enough for him to just train him in his cultivation? He could kind of sense that the dragon had some sort of feeling towards him. He probably knew him, or at least knew his master, and thus had a special understanding of him. This must have been why he had done this. He sometimes thought of what his father had said to him when he was young. He had naturally known that Yi Futian was extraordinary, and he had said that he was born to walk the path of the emperor. And Yu Sheng would help him by smoothing out all the obstacles on this road. This was what he believed. As for what he himself was, he did not want to think about that too much. He strode forward, and demonic power surged through the underground palace. Thousands of demons screamed, their chi flowing out in mighty rivers. The area transformed into a demon realm, burying all the power within and blocking the slaughtering gods. In the same instant that Dou Zhao saw Yu Sheng move, he moved as well. In his fighting god form, he could feel an incredible amount of pressure. He stepped forward, and his eyes became divine, shooting out beams of willpower. The fighting will transformed into divine light that shone throughout the underground palace. It seemed like it would dispel the demonic power. The 7 marks of the fighting god on his brow cast dazzling light, making his power reach an even higher level. He struck out with a fistful of the fist will of a fighting god. At that moment, 2 massive figures appeared in the 100-foot-tall hall. One was a fighting god, and the other was a demon god. They completely occupied the whole underground palace. They clashed immediately, their unbreakable fists slamming into each other. Boom! The very air itself shook, and violent winds swept out. The observers activated their defenses, but they were still knocked back by the wind. Many of them had to take many steps backward and lost their footing, but their eyes were still fixed firmly on the battlefield. What level of fighting was this? In the first battle since coming to the god's relic, they had encountered such fierce resistance. Cultivators who were new to the Renhuang level would not even have been this powerful. Bang, bang, bang. Beams of divine light pierced through the fighting god's body, and it seemed like they would break him apart. A clap of thunder rang out as the fighting god's body collapsed. Dou Zhao was sent flying, and he slammed into a wall. His fighting god form disappeared, and he returned to his original size. The seals of the fighting god on his forehead went dark as well. Cough, cough. He gave a light cough, and streams of blood flowed from his mouth. Dou Zhao looked at Yu Sheng, then wiped the blood away. He smiled and said, "I thought that in all the 3,000 realms of the Great Path, there was no one below the Renhuang level who would be able to hurt me once I had activated the 7th seal, though it is not unmatched in terms of power. I would never have thought that I would lose to you in our first real battle. But sure enough, you cannot underestimate the warriors of the 9 supreme realms. I would probably have needed to activate the 8th seal to fight you." "You are already very strong," said Yu Sheng. In reality, he did not need to be modest. He had met few people who could challenge him at that level. probably, the man beside him was the only other one. But they were not going to fight anymore, so practically speaking, Dou Zhao was the only one. Thus, he was obviously very strong. Dou Zhao could tell that Yu Xing really meant this, but for some reason, it still felt like mockery. Dou Zhao, who had lost to him, was still very strong. Did that mean he was praising himself as being even stronger? But in the end, he had lost, and there was no use thinking about any of that. Although this fighting will is naturally suited to me, I have lost, and so I give it to you. I am sure that Seventh Slayer will have no objections either, said Dou Zhao. Since he had lost, Seventh Slayer had no hope of victory. He was quite confident about that. It was not possible that there were multiple people here who were stronger than him. Seventh Slayer indeed had no objections and did not think about using the Seventh Spear art. Dou Zhao had been defeated in this way, and so it would be futile to fight anymore. The cost would be too high. Dou Zhao would probably have to rest for a while after this battle, which would delay his training. Let's go. Seventh Slayer turned very abruptly and left without the least bit of nostalgia. They had originally come here to seize the fighting will from the school of the Emperor Star, but since they couldn't get it, they had no reason to stay. There was no need to waste time here. Soon, all of the people from the clan of the Seven Slayers had left the underground palace. Yu Xing, go and try it out, said Yi Futian. If the fighting will was suited to Yu Xing's natural power and the power of the dragon, how much stronger would he get? But Yu Xing shook his head and said, I am not skilled in that sort of thing. I am not the one who should take it. You go. His impression was that there was nothing that Yi Futian could not take if he would just reach out for it. He was fine with being called the killer of the god's relic, and Yi Futian had some abilities that were not suitable to be used here. They might face Renwang's later, and thus it would be more suitable for Yi Futian to inherit the fighting will. Yi Futian did not argue any further. He looked at Dou Zhao, and a piece of fruit of the way filled with life will appeared in his hand. He gave it to Dou Zhao. Dou Zhao looked at the piece of fruit in shock. He looked back to Yi Futian. You are very powerful, so I'd like to be friends. If you run into any problems in the god's relic, we can work together. This fruit of the way will help you heal quickly, said Yi Futian. Dou Zhao was silent for a while after Yi Futian said this. But he was a clever man, so he smiled and said, I am Dou Zhao of the Dou tribe. On saying this, he took the fruit and took a bite. These two men who had just come were truly marvelous. We are Yi Futian and Yu Xing, said Yi Futian. I wish to take the god's relic for myself, so I may need you to leave. Fine, said Dou Zhao with a nod. He did not say any more. He rose, then led the rest of the members of the Dou tribe out. Yu Xing looked at Yi Futian speechlessly. He was so generous, and yet he himself had none of the fruit. He did not think this because he was bitter at Yi Futian. It was just that Dou Zhao had not needed it. He must have given it to him because Dou Zhao was straightforward. The tricks that people used in battle often reflected their personalities. Moreover, Dou Zhao was truly powerful. Of the three people they just fought, when Dou Zhao unleashed the seventh seal of the fighting god, he was the most powerful. If they continued on in this conflict between the 9 supreme realms, they were sure to face many more cultivators from top forces. Moreover, they still had many enemies fro before. There were several powerful forces in the Heavenly Mandate realm, the Golden Divine Nation in the Higher Heavens realm, and now the Shun clan was their enemy as well. They did not know what the future would hold. If they could make friends with the heirs of some other powerful forces, it would certainly not be a bad thing. Who said that everyone they met in the god's relic had to become their enemy? If they hadn't fought, they never would have met. Fighting was a way to make friends, as was shown by Dou Zhao and Yu Xing's fight. After the people from the Dou tribe had left, Yu Xing and Yi Futian were the only ones left in the underground palace. Yi Futian walked towards the end of the hall, where the fighting will formed an insubstantial light curtain. As he drew near, he could feel a powerful pressure. He had to work hard to make each step forward. Boom! He was sent flying backward as the fighting will entered into his body. This fighting will that had remained here coalesced for thousands of years was incredibly strong. Leaves and branches spread through Yi Futian's body. I will go outside and guard the door. Yu Xing turned and left the palace. Yi Futian's life spirit was blooming, and his dazzling divine tree covered his body, stretching out through the palace. It even covered the area before him where the fighting will was. The tree swayed, and golden light bloomed from within it. An imperial seal appeared on the tree. As the fighting will was drawn into it, it covered Yi Futian as well. As the leaves and branches touched it, the fighting will was gradually absorbed by the world tree. The deed of thorough comprehension activated, and Yi Futian's body became a furnace of the great path, making the world tree absorb the fighting will even faster. It spread out even closer to the origin of the fighting will as it sucked it up. Yi Futian strode forward towards the throne, covered by the divine tree. He looked at the incomparably frightening spear and the image that looked as divine as a god. The fighting will that had not dissipated had formed the image of an ancient divine general that had remained to this day. The tree's leaves and branches covered the spear as well. When he felt the powerful fighting will within, Yi Futian slowly reached out and grasped it. Suddenly, it surged into him. His body lit up with incomparably terrifying divine light, making him look like an emperor in a world of mortals. As he swallowed up and refined the fighting will, it became stronger and stronger. It seemed like his whole body was on fire. Outside the palace, Dou Zhao sat there recovering. Yusheng walked out of the gate. "Why are you coming out?" Dou Zhao asked him. "He is inheriting the fighting will," answered Yusheng. Dou Zhao did not say anything, but he was thinking, if Yusheng is so good at fighting, why should he not be the one to inherit the fighting will? But he was not going to ask that. Before long, a figure emerged from the underground palace. Dou Zhao looked up at Yi Futian and asked, "Why are you coming out?" "I'm all finished," said Yi Futian. "What?" Dou Zhao stared at Yi Futian. Who is he trying to fool? The spear is not bad. Yi Futian reached out a hand. Light flashed, and a spear appeared there, radiant and brilliant. Fighting will was pouring out of it. Dou Zhao felt like his mind was in turmoil. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Before Yi Futian and Yusheng had arrived, the three forces had already stopped fighting. But even though they had tried, they had been unable to get closer to the area covered by the fighting will. Otherwise, they would have already taken the spear and inherited the fighting will. Before Yi Futian and Yusheng had arrived, the three forces had already stopped fighting. But even though they had tried, they had been unable to get closer to the area covered by the fighting will. Otherwise, they would have already taken the spear and inherited the fighting will. But now Yi Futian had done both of those things incredibly quickly. Dou Zhao suddenly felt a little bit inferior. He now understood why it had been Yi Futian who had inherited the fighting will and not Yusheng. Could this even be called inheritance? It seemed like the spear had been placed there to wait for Yi Futian to take it. As for how he had taken it, Dou Zhao suddenly remembered how Yi Futian had told them to leave. It seemed that he purposely did not want them to see what he did. But no matter what trick he had used, he had done it incredibly quickly. "Where are you planning to go next?" Dou Zhao asked Yi Futian. "To the east. Many people seem to be going somewhere in that direction." "It seems like something happened," said Yi Futian. The cultivators of the Purple Gold Rat clan had gone out in many directions. This was not the only place where things were happening, they were happening in other directions as well. The demons of the Purple Gold Rat clan had some tricks of their own, and their sense of smell was very sharp. The god's relic has a lot of history. Many of the elders of the top forces have been here before, so they probably know some things about this place, just like the school of the Emperor Star, said Dou Zhao. The cultivators of the Dou tribe were not the first ones to come here. Those cultivators who had made it out alive had naturally recorded their experiences of what happened in the god's relic. Otherwise, how would they have known to follow the school of the Emperor Star? Yi Futian gave a slight nod. However, there is something I should remind you of, said Dou Zhao. Yi Futian nodded. Go ahead. According to what the elder of my tribe said, if you continue on in one direction until you reach the end, you will run into the great relic. A look of surprise flashed in Yi Futian's eyes. When they had followed the purple gold rats, They had seen that many forces were indeed traveling in a single direction and not stopping. Was the great relic something that had truly been left behind by the gods? The gods' relic seemed to be an entire world and was said to be the tomb of the gods. But could it have been rebuilt? Yi Futian nodded again. Then I will go into the east to have a look first, after which I will continue on eastward. When Yi Futian said this, Dou Zhao seemed to realize something, and a strange look came over his face. If you are here, then how do you know where the others are going? The more he learned about Yi Futian, the stranger he felt. What kind of person was this man? At first, it had seemed that these two had just been secretly following behind them, trying to take advantage of the situation. Now, they somehow seemed to know what was happening in other places. From Yi Futian's tone, it sounded like he even knew concrete details about what was going on. Yi Futian looked at Dou Zhao and smiled. I am using the mystical powers of the Great Path to foresee everything, both in the past and in the future. Dou Zhao's face went dark. He didn't have to tell him, but did he really have to lie so obviously? He may have been very powerful, but was there anyone in the world who would dare claim to have the power to see the past and the future? You rest here for a while. We'll go on ahead. Yi Futian was naturally joking. He took his leave and began walking off into the distance. Dou Zhao watched the disappearing figure speechlessly. The cultivators of the Dou tribe beside him looked at him and asked, How are you? I need a bit more time to recover. After saying this, Dou Zhao closed his eyes and said no more. The piece of fruit of the way that contained powerful life was truly marvelous. It was not only able to restore his life aura, but it was also able to repair his damaged spiritual willpower. The fruit contained the power of the great path of life and had infinite vitality. This was the basis of all human beings. When their vitality was strong, their spiritual will would be strong as well. The two of them were connected. When one's life aura or vitality grew weak, their spiritual will would grow weak as well. This is why, when people were wounded in battle, it was easier to destroy their willpower. Thus, due to this fruit, although they might have to stay behind for a little while, it would not be too long. Now, he just had to patiently recover. Those two guys did not know what kind of storm they had just whipped up in the god's relic. He would guess that those two were the greatest dark horses here. He did not know who would be unlucky enough to run into the two of them next. The entrance to the god's relic was in the City of the Ruins, which was in the Central Emperor realm. Thus, if you wanted to talk about who understood the god's relic the best, you would have to mention the top forces of the Central Imperial realm. These powers were ancient and prosperous with vast and deep secrets. Thus, they were certainly among the forces that understood the god's relic the most. Other than them, there were also the powerful elders of other top forces who had been to the god's relic before. They probably knew a little bit more. Thus, when they entered the god's relic, those forces who knew some things could head directly for their goals. For example, the School of the Emperor Star had done this, and the Dou tribe and the clan of the Seven Slayers had followed them. The other forces besides the School of the Emperor Star would naturally know some things about the god's relic. For example, the Yuanyang clan, Heavenly Sword Hall, and other forces had all headed directly east once they had reached the god's relic. The Yuanyang clan's formation was incredibly large. After all, they controlled the Yuanyang realm, and thus all the cultivators of that realm were their subjects and had depended on them to have a chance to come to the god's relic. Thus, once they had come here, they formed a massive and imposing formation. Zhu Qi, who had once been with Little Condor, was one of the people who came from the Yuanyang realm. At that moment, the massive crowd of people was standing outside of an ancient city. The city's gates were broken, and there were no signs of life from within. But as they stood there outside the city, the cultivators of the Yuanyang realm looked solemn. The entire massive city was covered by sword will. They could sense that the city had been pierced by countless swords, all of which seemed elegant yet insubstantial. They were all made out of sword will. This was an ancient city of swordsmanship. A great swordsman must have once ruled over it. Another force appeared outside the city in another spot. It was the cultivators of the Heavenly Sword Hall of the Myriad Realm. There were not as many of them as there were of the people from the Yuanyang realm, but every one of their swordsmen had a terrifying aura of swordsmanship, and they were gazing at the city fiercely. They had felt the sword will hear from far away. In another spot, another group of imposing figures stood there. They seemed to shine with divine sunlight, and they were very swift and fierce. These cultivators had come from the solar realm and were one of the top forces of that realm, Qishao Divine Mountain. Although they were not purely focused on swordsmanship, they did teach it, and thus they had come here. In addition, a force from the heavenly mandate realm had come as well. They were a group of women, Brahma's pure sky. He was leading them. They stood a little bit farther back than the other forces. Brahma's pure sky was one of the top forces in the heavenly mandate realm, but in reality, the heavenly mandate dynasty and the celestial gate of vast heaven were the strongest. The demon realm had the divine dragons and the sky demon court. Thus, Brahma's pure sky was not at the very top. When looking at the whole of the 9 supreme realms, they did not stand out very much. Thus, he knew what she should do and what she should not do. Be careful when we go in. The whole city is filled with sword will. The young man at the head of the Yuanyang clan was wearing a robe and had an impressive bearing. After he reminded everyone of this, he strode forward towards the ancient city. But they could not see any corpses here. There was one possibility: they had been destroyed by the sword will. Futian walked a little further in and grasped one of the broken swords. He could feel the sword will within it. The swords are broken and the people are dead, he said, but the people are gone and the sword will remains. In the past, these broken swords would have been extremely valuable to him. But at his current level, they were useless. Let's go to the center of the city, said Futian as he continued forward. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Sword City was barren and dead silent but also had an incredibly tense atmosphere. There was sword will everywhere. Sword City was barren and dead silent but also had an incredibly tense atmosphere. There was sword will everywhere. Futian had already forged a sword body of the Great Path, so the sword will could not affect him. But many of the people behind him had to actively resist it. The whole city is locked down by sword will. What was left here? Whispered Futian. If an apocalyptic war had broken out here in the past, the ruler of the city must have left something behind before he died, which is why he had made the sword will covering the city not dissipate even after thousands of years. He wanted to seal it here. Perhaps it was just to remind future generations that he had once lived. Yaya pointed and said, "There is a sword over there." Futian saw it as well. Off in the distance, there was a sword floating in midair. Sword will was falling all around it, forming a terrifying matrix of swordsmanship. The sword will was particularly strong there, much stronger than the sword will where they were standing. However, the people who had entered the city before them seemed to be much more focused on the Lingtian sword will, and they were all heading in that direction. Futian and the others continued on through the ruins. Powerful sword will would occasionally pass in front of them. "Follow me," said Futian to those behind him, "only walk where I walk. Do not stray from the path." Everyone nodded. They had discovered that killing sword will would sometimes fall on them. Some people who had been ahead of them had already been hit, as they found bloodstains on the ground. But there were no bodies. They had been completely destroyed by the sword will. Judging by the bloodstains, they had died not long ago. "This is getting more and more dangerous," whispered Futian. His eyes were like those of a god, able to pierce through all illusions. Moreover, he had the ability to sense danger in advance. Thus, they had been able to avoid all danger so far. Up ahead, a large group of figures had stopped and were not continuing on into the city. There were cultivators from the Yuanyang clan, the Heavenly Sword Hao, and Qishao Divine Mountain there, as well as some from Brahma's pure sky. They were missing a few people, and some of the people who were there were wounded. When Futian and the others reached them, all eyes turned on them. Many of them recognized him, as he had once come into conflict with the Heavenly Sword Hall because of the Swordmaster of Lihan and had fought the people of the Yuanyang clan for Little Condor. It was only the people of Qishao Divine Mountain that he had never come in contact with. "Have you been here before?" the young head of the Yuanyang clan asked Futian. They naturally knew there would be people behind them. Previously they had not cared, But they had discovered that Yi Futian had marvelous means of avoiding danger. Thus, they had stopped to wait for him. "I have not," said Yi Futian. "No." The young head of the Yuanyang clan was named Yuan Hong. A look of doubt came over his face when he heard Yi Futian's denial. "How did you avoid the danger then?" "I can predict threats," answered Yi Futian. "Then may we walk with you?" asked Yuan Hong. "Then we can share all our adventures." The people from Qishao Divine Mountain and the Heavenly Sword Hall were looking at him as well. If he didn't agree, then something would happen here that was worthy of a story. Yi Futian thought for a moment, then smiled and nodded. "All right, all of you may follow me." "Thank you." Yuan Hong had not thought that Yi Futian would answer so sincerely. He smiled in appreciation. Yi Futian and the others continued forward through the crowd, with Zhu Qi staring at him and Little Condor. Previously, Yu Sheng's power had shocked her, and she would never have thought that they would come here. She did not know what was going to happen. "Long time no see, Lord Yi," said Qin He of Brahma's pure sky with a nod. Many of the other goddesses of Brahma's pure sky beside her looked at Yi Futian as well. He was obviously very familiar to Qin He. Her memories of the battle of Brahma's sky city were still fresh. "You are looking even more elegant than before, Goddess Qin," said Yi Futian. Qin He nodded. Yi Futian was walking in front of the whole group. The people from the other forces were a bit surprised. They had not thought that they might know each other, and it seemed like they were, in fact, relatively close. However, Yi Futian's formation was really quite weak. Divine light was still shining in Yi Futian's eyes as he led them through Sword City. After a while, they reached the center of the city. There was a sword palace there, in front of which stood a huge sword matrix. Countless swords were there, blocking the entrance. Hundreds of feet above the sword matrix, there was another sword floating in the air, with many beams of light shooting out of it in all directions. This was where the sword will was coming from. Some of the people's faces darkened. The sword will here had put them under a lot of pressure, so much that it had been difficult to bear. They could faintly see a faint and blurry figure sitting on the sword. It was probably the leftover will from the ruler of the city. "Some people have already been here," said Yu Sheng. There were 6 swords stuck into the sword eyes around the sword matrix, leaving sword marks that stretched out in all directions and made the sword matrix light up in many places. This had clearly all been done by people who had come here before. However, the matrix was missing 3 sword eyes and 3 swords. If they had been taken, it probably would have undone the matrix. Of course they have. And similarly, the more talented you are, the more people will pay attention to you, Yi Futian told her. "Once I become a Renhuang, I will no longer be a junior. I will be regarded as powerful by all of the 3,000 realms of the Great Path. At that time, I will definitely come into contact with the other great forces." Yaya nodded. Naturally, she understood this. Once Yi Futian became a Renhuang, things would be different. With his talent and strength, he would truly attract the attention of the people of the 9 supreme realms. When a man of unparalleled talent walks alone through the world, he could possibly make the whole world his enemy. I faced this situation before in the barren state. I hope that on my way to dominate the 3,000 realms of the Great Path, I will make many more friends. Here in the God's Relic, we have many juniors, all of them heirs of many different forces. They will be in charge of their respective forces in the future. They will influence the situation in the 9 supreme realms, said Yi Futian. He did not continue explaining. There were still some things he wanted to do. But doing them by himself, even as a Renhuang, would be nearly impossible. He was probably the most skilled person here in the God's Relic. If he had to fight, he could fight them all. But if he did that, then when he left, he would have made an enemy of all 9 supreme realms. Yaya stared at his handsome profile. Her mood seemed to change. Would Yi Futian be able to dominate the whole world when he became a Renhuang? One can inherit the will of the swordsman who once ruled this place here. It is a wonderful opportunity, but it is also dangerous. In fact, I don't want to put you in danger. As long as you are safe, all will be well. But you and the sword master of Lihin both have a chance to inherit the will. Do you want it, or should it go the sword master of Lihin? Yi Futian suddenly asked, changing the subject. Now they were talking about who would inherit the will. If the other forces knew of this, who knew how they would feel? From what he said, it was clear that despite the goodwill that Yi Futian had expressed, he was not going to just give up on the things that he should fight for. There were some things that could only be given to the people that he trusted the most. Give it to the sword master of Lihan. Even if it's dangerous, he won't want to miss this opportunity, said Yaya. She had known the sword master of Lihan for many years. Very well, said Yi Futian with a nod. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Yuan Hong and the other Yuanyang clan cultivators, as well as the cultivators from Heavenly Sword Hall and Qishao Divine Mountain, were waiting in front of the central Divine Sword Matrix. Yuan Hong and the other Yuanyang clan cultivators, as well as the cultivators from Heavenly Sword Hall and Qishao Divine Mountain, were waiting in front of the central Divine Sword Matrix. After a short while, Yi Futian and Yaya returned carrying a sword in their hands. You managed to get one? Yuan Hong exclaimed as he looked at Yi Futian. Yi Futian nodded his head and said, "Give it a try." As he said this, he waved his palm. The sword immediately flew out with a whistling sound and landed directly in one of the 9 major points of the Divine Matrix. Countless sword rune lines lit up in an instant. They were even more dazzling when they were lit up. Clearly, there were no issues with this sword. Many people glanced at Yi Futian. He actually managed to find something. Yuan Hong was somewhat curious, so he asked, "What makes you so sure?" "This sword stood out too much," Yi Futian answered with a smile. Yuan Hong was somewhat doubtful. Was it truly so simple? Was it really that easy to retrieve the swords? If it was so easy to do so, then why had all the people who had previously entered God's relic only managed to obtain 6 swords? Our members and the members of Heavenly Sword Hall have also discovered a sword. They are attempting to retrieve it as we speak, Yuan Hong said. Yi Futian nodded in agreement. However, they took a long time to retrieve this sword. When they returned, quite a few people were missing, and there was even a person who was injured. It was one of the cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall that was a step away from becoming a Renhuang. He and another top figure of the Yuanyang clan had joined forces to retrieve this sword. A cultivator from Heavenly Sword Hall walked up and inserted the sword into the matrix. Instantly, countless streams of sword chi burst forth from the vast divine matrix and covered the entire sword city. Only the last major point was left. Many swords were already clanking in harmony. They seemed to have formed some sort of resonance. Only one sword is missing. The rest of them looked at the divine sword matrix. They only had to obtain one more sword, and they could unlock the divine sword matrix. It would be a great fateful encounter. However, sword will was everywhere in this sword city. There were many swords dispersed throughout the city. Which sword was it? Have you discovered anything? Yuan Hong asked. The rest of them all shook their heads. Should we gather all the swords in the city and test each sword one by one? Yuan Hong continued saying. Yi Futian was speechless. As expected of a top figure from the Central Emperor Realm's Yuanyang clan, it was difficult for ordinary people to compare with such spirit. How much effort would they have to expend in order to retrieve all of the swords in this place? Many people would most likely have to lose their lives for them to achieve such a feat. If we get it wrong, we might end up destroying the foundations of the sword matrix, the cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall exclaimed. Yuan Hong scowled and said, That means that our only choice is to find the last sword. Do you have any ideas on how to do so? The members from Heavenly Sword Hall all shook their heads. They did not have any leads at the moment. I know where the sword is, Yi Futian said. Immediately, everyone's gazes fell on him. Where is it? Yuan Hong asked. Yi Futian walked towards a spot not far to the side of the divine sword matrix. There was a broken sword there. He picked up the broken sword. He could clearly sense that the broken sword also contained a powerful sword will. He carried the broken sword and walked towards the sword matrix. Yuan Hong and the rest revealed strange looks on their faces. The sword was right beside the sword matrix? Was it also a broken sword? Many people were somewhat doubtful. Hold on, The cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall cried out as they saw Yi Futian walking towards the sword matrix. Yi Futian looked towards them. How can you be certain that it is this broken sword? The leader of the members of Heavenly Sword Hall was renowned in the Myriad Realm. He had cultivated for many years and was still a sword saint, but his ability was unfathomable. He was known as Sword Saint of Avicii. The sword matrix led me to it, Yi Futian said as he looked towards the divine sword matrix in front of him. Are you certain? Sword Saint of Avicii opened his eyes and stared at Yi Futian. There was a divine light in his eyes, and his gaze was extremely frightening. It won't be a problem, Yi Futian replied. If you are wrong and the sword matrix is destroyed, you will pay the price, Sword Saint of Avicii said. After that, he did not say any more. Yu Sheng frowned when he heard these words. This person's tone was very arrogant. Who did he take Yi Futian to be? Was Yi Futian their errand boy? If Yi Futian made a mistake, he would need to pay the price? Yi Futian smiled and kept walking. He inserted the broken sword into the final point of the matrix. Sword will lingered, and everyone's gazes stared at the divine matrix. The next moment, the 9 swords lit up with a frightening glow. The broken sword seemed to have been restored to its original unbroken state. Divine light flickered as though divine swords were inserted in the 9 points of the matrix. At this moment, the divine sword matrix began to flow. The central pattern of the sword matrix also began to rotate. From all around, countless sword chi streaked towards the divine matrix. The sword matrix's light screen was opened, and they could now walk into it. We did it. Many people were astonished. That broken sword was actually one of the swords they needed. How did this fellow know that it was the one? Could it be that the sword matrix had actually led him to it? Yi Futian ignored what the others thought about him. His gaze was aimed at the divine sword matrix. His eyes were extremely bright and could see through everything. Within his field of vision, the sword will in the entire city was flowing towards that divine sword. The sword will then descended into the center of the pattern. Such a sword will was something that he could not stand against. As expected, it is not something that is easily inherited, Yi Futian thought. The members of the few top forces were about to make a move, especially the cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall. They were the purest swordsmanship force among the top forces. However, they had also sensed the might of this sword will. Wanting to inherit this sword will was most likely not going to be easy. It could even pose a danger to their lives. The sword matrix has opened. Please send a representative to give it a try. My side will go last. Whoever manages to get the sword can lay claim to it. How about it? Yi Futian suggested as he faced the crowd. Yuan Hong looked at Yi Futian and nodded his head slightly, saying, I agree. Let the various forces take turns. Yi Futian had the greatest contribution in activating this matrix. He was already being gracious by letting them go first. The cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall did not say anything and remained staring at the matrix. With the strength of Yi Futian's party, what else could he do but let them go first? Even if Yi Futian allowed them to go first, could it be that he believed that he could still obtain the sword in the end? No matter what happened, it would never reach his group's turn. Since young Master Yi is here, we will not participate, Qin he said with a faint smile. Other people might not know much about Yi Futian, but she did. Moreover, there was some level of friendship between Yi Futian and her. Since they would not be in the running, they might as well declare it. Thank you, goddess. Yi Futian smiled as he nodded his head. Some people looked at Qin He's group. This woman had a stunning appearance, but she acted so subdued before Yi Futian. Could it be because of Yi Futian's looks? Yi Futian was indeed a fine specimen of handsome looks. However, if it was so, wasn't she too shallow? For cultivators, especially male cultivators, they did not value appearances at all. One's ability would always come first. Everyone, please go ahead, Yi Futian said with a smile. How could inheriting this sword possibly be that easy? It was not just him who knew this, the other forces also knew this. Their expressions turned slightly serious. Heavenly Sword Hall is a swordsmanship force. You may go first, Yuan Hong from Yuanyang clan said to the cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall, inviting them to go first. Sword Saint of Avicii's gaze turned towards the center of the sword matrix. He was not very confident. "Who will go?" he asked the cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall. They were all somewhat hesitant. If they succeeded, it was possible that they could inherit the divine sword. However, if they failed, it was possible that they would die. The first person to go would have a great but dangerous opportunity. "I will go." An elder from Heavenly Sword Hall walked out. He walked towards the center of the divine matrix. In an instant, a frightening sword will flowed in. Step by step, he walked to the center of the pattern on the divine matrix. Instantly, endless sword will descended. He reached out his hand to grab hold of the divine sword. But in Sword City, endless sword will surged into the divine sword. Sword will descended, penetrating the elder's body. His facial expression changed drastically. Within his body, a powerful sword will burst forth. Even his sword spirit had appeared. Sword will seemed to form physical swords that collided with his sword spirit. The elder let out a scream. Continuous streams of sword will descended, and his body then gradually dissipated into nothingness. Those who witnessed this scene felt their hearts shiver. The elder had failed. As expected, he paid the price for failing with his life. The face of Sword Saint of Avicii turned sullen. He looked towards the cultivators from the other forces and said, "It's your turn." The cultivators of Yuanyang clan, as well as Qishao Divine Mountain, stared at the divine matrix. They had all fallen silent. Under such circumstances, they were also not confident that they could obtain the sword. "We have decided to continue observing for now," the cultivators of Qishao Divine Mountain declared. "Does anyone want to give it a try?" Yuan Hong looked towards the cultivators of the Yuanyang clan and declared, "Whoever obtains it can claim it as their own." With the previous example, no one dared to act. They were all not confident that they could succeed. This divine sword was not so easy to obtain. Looking at this scene, Yuan Hong turned towards Yi Futian and said, "It seems that you all should still go first." "All right." Yi Futian nodded. He walked forwards into the center of the sword matrix. When the others saw this, they revealed strange looks. Was he personally attempting to retrieve the sword? When Yi Futian walked into the divine matrix, he felt the endless sword will descending upon him. Deed of thorough comprehension activated and became a divine furnace. 9 words circled him, and heaven and earth resonated. At the same time, inside his body, there were countless branches and leaves enveloping his core. When the sword will flowed into him, it was consumed within his body. "Ha!" The crowd was staring at Yi Futian. His response seemed mild. Yi Futian raised his head and looked at the divine sword above him. His eyes were frightening. In this instant, he seemed to have entered the world of the sword. Within this world of the sword, there was an illusory figure that was practicing sword techniques. This is a sword spirit, Yi Futian thought. After a short while, a dull thud came from within the divine sword matrix. Yi Futian stepped out from within it. He walked out unscathed. However, he did not manage to inherit the divine sword. The Yuanyang clan and cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall all glanced bizarrely at Yi Futian. Did he manage to walk out alive? However, he must have been through a great deal. How was it? Yaya looked at Yi Futian. "I'm all right," Yi Futian said in a low voice. His heart wavered slightly as he looked at Swordmaster of Lihan and transmitted his thoughts, saying, "Swordmaster of Lihan, are you willing to inherit this sword?" Swordmaster of Lihan revealed a strange look as he looked at Yi Futian. "Just now, I have already investigated it. There is a sword spirit hidden within this sword. It should have been left behind by the previous owner of the divine sword," Yi Futian explained. "If Swordmaster of Lihan wishes to inherit this sword, when you step up to the sword, you must first sense the existence of the sword spirit. Do not hesitate and directly inject your spiritual soul into the sword and merge it with the sword spirit. However, I am not certain what will happen after this. It is very likely that you will pay with your life if you fail. According to my estimation, the chances of you succeeding is only 50%. Swordmaster of Lihan was silent. He looked at Yi Futian and asked, "If it was you?" 100%. Yi Futian did not hide anything and continued saying, "It is of little value to me. Hence, Swordmaster of Lihan should decide for himself." Swordmaster of Lihan had been cultivating for many years. Although his combat ability was not considered to be exceptionally powerful, his state of mind had experienced years of tempering and was extremely stable. He had also been constantly pursuing even higher levels of achievement. Hence, even though there was some risk, Yi Futian still let Swordmaster of Lihan decide for himself. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Even if the Sword Saint of Avicii tried his hand at it, he would most likely not be able to decipher the secret of the divine sword in one go. This was enough for the Swordmaster of Lihan to have this opportunity. Yes, the Sword Saint of Avicii merely responded with one word. This time, he personally came forward and walked towards the pattern of the sword matrix beneath the divine sword. If Yi Futian could walk out alive and unscathed, what did the Sword Saint of Avicii have to fear? He wanted to see how profound this divine sword was exactly. The Sword Saint of Avicii walked into the sword matrix and felt an extremely powerful pressure. Sword will pour down on him. Brilliant golden divine light lit up around his body. His pupils looked towards the divine sword. Innumerable beams of golden light enveloped it. He wanted to directly seize it. His will swept out and was extremely domineering. The divine matrix activated, and endless sword will flowed in from the entire city. Sword will kept descending upon him. A frightening scene exploded on the divine sword matrix. The Sword Saint of Avicii let out a low groan. His face suddenly turned pale. However, his will still did not give up on observing and invading the divine sword. He seemed to vaguely sense something. This divine sword seemed to have a spirit within it. The sword spirit seemed to have become a sword. It came towards his spiritual soul along with countless sword will. His expression suddenly changed. With a loud rumble, golden divine light flashed. He let out a dull moan, and his body immediately vanished and appeared below. The sword will tore large holes in the clothes on his body. A streak of blood flowed out from the corners of his mouth. Is he injured? The cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall looked at the Sword Saint of Avicii. Was he also injured? However, the Sword Saint of Avicii directly turned to look at the divine sword. He had already caught a glimpse of the mystery behind it. With a few more chances, he was confident that he could decipher its secret and seize control of it. Yi Futian glanced at the Sword Saint of Avicii. This person was more powerful than he imagined. I will try again. The Sword Saint of Avicii walked forward, wanting to continue trying. Sir, Yi Futian yelled out. The Sword Saint of Avicii turned and looked at him. Since we have agreed on the rules, let's all follow them. That way, we can all be amicable. They should be the ones to go next. Yi Futian turned to look at the cultivators of Yuanyang Clan and Qishao Divine Mountain. The Sword Saint of Avicii glanced at Yi Futian. He had an intense penetrating gaze. At a glance, it was as though a sword was shooting over at Yi Futian's eyes from a distance. When Yi Futian sensed that sword will, he raised an eyebrow. However, the Sword Saint of Avicii did nothing after that and still backed down. Since he could not manage to do it in one try, the others should also not be able to do so. There can be no construction without destruction, Yi Futian mumbled. He had still somewhat underestimated the might of the divine sword. Letting the Swordmaster of Lihan inherit it was indeed extremely risky. However, this was Swordmaster of Lihan's decision. If something truly went wrong, Yi Futian would definitely take action to try to save his life. However, right now, the arrow had already been drawn. They could only continue pushing forward. Ding! With a sharp whistling sound, the Swordmaster of Lihan's sword spirit cracked, and the divine sword descended, appearing inches above his head. Swordmaster of Lihan's entire person seemed to have fallen into a state of absolute deadly silence. In the sky above the entire vast and endless sword city, countless sword will came down and landed on the divine sword. They then penetrated his body as though they were baptizing his figure. Yi Futian's senses were extremely sharp. He could clearly sense the pain that Swordmaster of Lihan was experiencing now. Sword Master of Lihan appeared to be deadly silent, but in reality he was withstanding unparalleled pain. Tens of thousands of swords were passing through his body. The only thought in his mind was to keep on bracing it. He was facing the baptism of all the sword will in the entire sword city. Is this considered a success? Yi Futian clenched his fist slightly as he witnessed the majestic scene in the divine matrix. If the sword master of Lihan succeeded, it would be a metamorphosis for him. Like a butterfly emerging from a cocoon, the sword master of Lihan would complete this baptism. For Yi Futian, this would not be of much benefit. However, it was different for the sword master of Lihan. It would be a truly transcendent metamorphosis for him. The sword saint of Avicii took a step forward. There was a golden divine light in his eyes. His eyes pierced through the empty space and stared straight ahead. A golden divine sword appeared with a flash. This person was actually showing signs of succeeding. Construction after destruction. This person, who had previously wanted Heavenly Sword Hall to bring him along into God's relic, was actually about to inherit this divine sword? Was Yi Futian's prior attempt just to pave the way for this person? Qin He also noticed this. Her beautiful eyes glanced at Yi Futian. Did he give this fateful encounter to the sword master of Lihan? Sir, what are you doing? Yi Futian stepped forward and stood before Sword Saint of Avicii, saying, We have laid down the rules before this in order to be amicable and to see who was destined to inherit this divine sword. It has always been that those with ability would seize the fateful encounters of God's relic. What rules are there to speak of? The Sword Saint of Avicii said indifferently. After he said this, countless golden divine swords appeared around him. Each divine sword was branded with golden space runes. The handsome figure stood in midair, like a white-haired god of war. The handsome figure stood in midair, like a white-haired god of war. At this moment, the fighting will of Yi Futian was intense. The cultivators of the Heavenly Sword Hall frowned. Sword will surged out from their bodies too. Those who stepped forward would die. Yi Futian was attempting to stop the Heavenly Sword Hall alone. Moreover, he had the audacity to utter such a presumptuous statement, having no respect for the Heavenly Sword Hall at all. The cultivators of Yuanyang clan stared at Yi Futian with great interest. They had not expected him to be such a domineering figure. However, could he really stop the Heavenly Sword Hall? Swoosh swoosh. Dazzling sword will erupted and charged towards Yi Futian ferociously. A swordsman beside the Sword Saint of Avicii took a step forward. Countless hurricanes and storms appeared all around them as a myriad of swords was unleashed from the eyes of the storms, aiming straight for Yi Futian. The swords attempted to tear the space apart. Those who stepped forward would die. He wanted to see for himself how he would die. But Yi Futian's figure moved. His arm shook, and the spear became a beam of light that directly charged into the storm. With just his body of flesh and blood, he pierced right into the eye of the storm. At this moment, a golden hole seemed to appear in the storm. A godly spear appeared and swept across the sky. Bang! A soft thud sounded. The swordsman that had attacked saw a golden illusion. The next moment, the spear directly pierced through his glabella. Fresh blood seeped out. The scene was horrifying. How is it possible? This final thought emerged in the swordsman's mind. After that, his consciousness dimmed, and his spiritual soul shattered. His body directly plummeted down to the ground. He was killed in one blow. I am not fooling around, Yi Futian said indifferently as he pointed his spear at the members of the Heavenly Sword Hall before him. A suffocating sword will envelop the space around them. Many sword spirits directly appeared from thin air and floated behind the cultivators of the Heavenly Sword Hall. Not fooling around? He actually killed someone. Alone, Yi Futian stood in mid-air in front of the cultivators of the Heavenly Sword Hall, threatening that anyone who stepped forward would die. This scene was extremely embarrassing for the members of the Heavenly Sword Hall. Not only was it because one of their companions had fallen, but it was also because this was a disgrace for the Heavenly Sword Hall. A person who had wanted to join Heavenly Sword Hall in order to enter God's relic had now snatched the teachings of the divine sword from right in front of them. As for them, they were being held back by a man with a spear. As the strongest swordsmanship force in the Myriad Realm, the Heavenly Sword Hall had never encountered such a disgrace. Moreover, this time, their commander was the powerful sword saint of Avicii. The cultivators of the Heavenly Sword Hall wielded their sword spirits together. They mainly cultivated sword spirits. Their sword spirits were very powerful. Each sword spirit had frightening rune lines imprinted on them. Their way was imprinted on them. A sword spirit guiding a cultivator in their cultivation could increase the chances of them breaking through to the Renhuang plane. Each sword spirit was forged through many hardships. When they reached the Renhuang plane, their sword spirits could directly serve as the foundation for their divine wheel of the Great Path. In an instant, countless sword spirits pointed towards Yi Futian at the same time. It seemed as though the space was about to be ripped to shreds. Each sword spirit contained different ways, but they were all very sharp. Sword Will howled with sharp ear-piercing screams. Who could possibly survive an attack from so many of these swords? This time, they wielded their swords but did not advance. It seemed that the death of the person before had caused them to grow cautious, even though they were dissatisfied. On Yi Futian's body, Renhuang-level fighting will furiously burst forth. He had an imposing aura. Yi Futian stood alone against so many of them. He became a peerless god of war. With a spear in hand, he was invincible. The swords attacked, and the space was torn apart. The sharp howl of swords ringed in the ears of all present. Destructive winds filled the air. Countless sword spirits attacked Yi Futian at the same time, all of the swords flying together. Each of them was an extraordinary weapon. This scene was grand and domineering. Yi Futian took a step forward. His fighting will that was bursting forth swelled to its limit. Great path aura surged forth. The spear in Yi Futian's hand pierced forwards into the space. Although he had not practiced spear techniques, he had practiced halberd techniques. Their great paths were interconnected, and there were similarities between spears and halberds. The spear was like a dragon that rumbled forward with an unparalleled fighting will. Rumble! A dull sound exploded in the space. Once the spear landed, the entire space before Yi Futian was blown apart. The sword spirits trembled violently. Cracks even appeared on some sword spirits. The swords shook, and some sword spirit immediately shattered while cracks appeared on others. Dull sounds reverberated in the surrounding space. Many people spat out mouthfuls of fresh blood. Their faces turned pale. The sword will of some of these people dissipated, their auras rapidly weakening. In just an instant, the auras of the cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall were drastically weakened. One spear. It was still just one spear. Everyone else was astonished. This white-haired youth was actually powerful to such an extent. Who could receive a strike from his spear? With him standing there, no one could take a step forward. Among the Yuanyang clan, Zhu Qi was shocked. The master of the Black Wind Condor was so powerful. His abilities were actually so terrifying. It actually was as that despicable Black Wind Condor had said. Compared to Yi Futian, the monstrous figures that she knew of paled into insignificance. Among Yuanyang Palace, the ruling power of the Yuanyang realm, who could take a hit from this spear? Even among the members of the Heavenly Sword Hall of the 9 Supreme Realms, no one could do so. It was even more so for them, a force from a lower world ruled by the Yuanyang clan. She recalled that this person had a friendly attitude and that he had actively sought out the swords for the crowd. He had also suggested that they all took turns to try and inherit the divine sword based on destiny and luck. Zhu Qi had believed that he had done so because he was weak. Now, as she looked at him again, he was so outstanding. It was as though the person from before and the person now were two completely different people. Let alone Zhu Qi, even the commander of Yuanyang clan, Yuan Hong was extremely astonished inside. That spear strike was definitely stunning. This person's elegance and talent were comparable to the figures at the pinnacle of the 9 realms. Such a person was actually a nobody. Yuan Hong had not known of him before this. Yuan Hong even believed that today's contest for the divine sword was unrelated to this white-haired youth. After all, Yi Futian's group was weak. Such a lineup could not possibly contend for the divine sword. Even if Yuan Hong followed the agreement and did not contend for it, Would the other forces also agree to do so? Just as Yuan Hong had predicted, Heavenly Sword Hall did not agree to this and directly attacked. When Heavenly Sword Hall snatched the divine sword away from the Swordmaster of Lihan, Yuan Hong would then snatch the divine sword away from Heavenly Sword Hall. However, Yuan Hong had not imagined that a man and a spear was standing against Heavenly Sword Hall. When one man guarded the pass, 10,000 men would not be able to get through. The spear in Yi Futian's hand emanated a powerful Renhuang-level fighting will. It was most likely an item he acquired from God's relic. With Yi Futian's talent, the person who inherited the divine sword by right should not be the Swordmaster of Lihan. Unless Yi Futian intentionally gave up the opportunity to the Swordmaster of Lihan. Yi Futian's attempt prior to this was not to inherit the divine sword, but to examine it and search for ways to inherit it. Moreover, he had successfully carried out what he had intended to do. Hence, they witnessed the success of the Swordmaster of Lihan. Giving up the teachings of the divine sword willingly, what kind of disposition was this? Did he look down on such teachings? As the direct heir of the Yuanyang clan, Yuan Hong was well aware that God's relic was not a site left by modern-age swordsmen. It was an ancient battlefield. The teachings left here were a complete great path. The reason why God's relic caused such a huge commotion in the 9 realms was that many fateful encounters were hidden here. Anyone who was fortunate enough to seize it would leave this place as an extraordinary Renhuang. The maidens of Brahma's pure sky stared at Yi Futian. Their eyes glistened with light. He had grown stronger, far stronger than when they met him at Shantian Pavilion. Right now, even if he was faced with Yi Tianyu again, the latter would most likely be no match for him. Besides, he was Virgin Genie of Brahma's pure sky. In the past, she visited the prophet when she was in the demon realm. She first met Yi Futian there. Suddenly, she recalled an incident. Back then, not long after Yi Futian had entered the prophet's palace, the prophet committed suicide. Since then, there was no prophet in this world. Prior to his death, the prophet had prophesied that there would be a huge occurrence in the heavenly mandate realm. Everyone had their attention drawn to Gu Tianxing and Gu Donglu, so nobody drew a connection between the death of the prophet and Yi Futian, the last person whom the prophet had met before he died. However, as Genie recalled this incident now, she was struck by the sudden realization. Her heart was throbbing. Could it be that Yi Futian was the one who would transform the heavenly mandate realm, as predicted by the prophet in his prophecy? If the death of the prophet was related to Yi Futian, what was the hidden story behind the case? Yi Futian and Yu Xing guarded the pass, ensuring that no one could disrupt the Swordmaster of Lihan from inheriting the teachings of the divine sword. The party from Taishan Mountain was a tad bit jealous of the Swordmaster of Lihan. Yi Futian treated this swordsman really well. The swordsman was most likely a senior that Yi Futian had a lot of respect for. Hence, Yi Futian offered such an important fateful encounter to him. Endless sword will circulated. All the sword will in the entire sword city continued to gush towards the sword matrix, where the Swordmaster of Lihan was. As weak as he was, his body persevered through this stage. His sword will gradually recovered in his body, strengthening him once again. In front of Yi Futian, the sword saint of Avicii's pair of golden eyes remained fixed on him. As expected, no one from Heavenly Sword Hall could take one step further. In the previous attack, only swords had been sent out. No one had advanced. However, the sword saint of Avicii had not sent out his sword. Dazzling golden light emanated from the body of the sword saint of Avicii. In his figure, a divine sword with countless golden rune lines appeared. It hovered above his head. He formed sword mudra with both of his hands. In an instant, sword shadows covered the sky. With Yi Futian's body as the center, countless divine swords imprinted with golden rune lines appeared, blocking out the sky. Beams of divine swords descended, forming a frightening spatial sword veil. They actually formed an astonishing light shroud that sealed Yi Futian within it. Spatial divine swords. Yi Futian raised his head and glanced around. There were golden divine swords everywhere around him. The divine sword in midair above the sword saint of Avicii's head seemed to be a sword spirit that had merged with a Renhuang implement. It emanated a gorgeous Renhuang light. Swords resonated with clanking sounds. Endless spatial divine swords floated in the sky. Go! The sword saint of Avicii uttered this word. Divine swords swept across the space towards Futian. Almost all at the same time, in the sky above, countless spatial divine swords traversed the space and descended instantly, slashing across from afar. Rumble! A savage fighting will erupted from Futian. As he took one step forward, the air around him tightened as though the space was under his choke, slowing down the speed of the swords. Billowing fighting will surged out from Futian's body. He lunged and the spear went for its target. In an instant, the overwhelming fighting will was transformed into countless spear shadows, colliding with the divine swords. The heavens and earth shook. Destructive power swept up into the sky. However, Futian's body instead became a beam of brilliant divine light that immediately pierced through the space and charged straight ahead. The spear's straight tip landed on the strongest divine sword. A brilliant glow was emitted. The divine sword flew back, and the sword saint of Avicii let out a dull groan. A formless power sent his body flying backward from the shock. He collided into the cultivators of the heavenly sword hall behind him before finally coming to a stop. Cough. A soft cough was heard. A streak of blood flowed out from the corner of the mouth of the sword saint of Avicii. It was still just one spear. It was invincible. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Among them was the swordsman who had crossed swords with the swordmaster of Lihen back then. They all felt somewhat dissatisfied. They might have felt better if Futian had inherited the divine sword himself. However, for a person who found it hard to even enter God's relic to inherit the divine sword, they naturally found it hard to accept this. They could only say that this person's luck was heaven-defying. This fateful encounter would most likely change his destiny. Although, as of now, they still did not know what benefits the divine sword would bestow onto the swordmaster of Lihen. The accumulation of the sword will in all of Sword City, together with that divine sword, was enough to cause him to undergo a metamorphosis. He had already destroyed his own sword spirit and was now reconstructing it. Very quickly, the cultivators of Heavenly Sword Hall left one by one. The members of Qishao Divine Mountain also did not say much and did not even leave behind any words before turning to leave decisively. Since someone had already inherited the divine sword, and they also had no confidence in taking down Futian, remaining here was a waste of time. Brahma's pure sky would naturally not contend with Futian over the divine sword. However, Qin he did not leave and instead remained there. Although currently Qin he had improved greatly and was already halfway to reaching the Renhuang Plain, she still knew her own limitations well. Her abilities would be top tier in the Heavenly Mandate realm, but in the 9 realms, she held no advantage. She could not contend against Futian. Right now, there was an opportunity before her to travel together with Futian. Currently, only Yuanyang clan still had the ability to contest for the divine sword. Futian turned his gaze towards Yuanhong. However, Yuanhong smiled and said, "Congratulations. Since the relic has been obtained by you, we will be taking our leave." "Many thanks," Futian replied while nodding in appreciation. Among the few forces, the Yuanyang clan from the Central Emperor realm posed the largest threat to them. For Yuanhong to voluntarily give up this divine sword was naturally the best outcome. Futian did not have to worry about offending them as well. "I'm Yuanhong from Yuanyang clan. May we meet again," Yuanhong said while saluting Futian with his fists. "I am Futian, a disciple of Sky River Temple of the Tianhe realm. May we meet again," Futian replied. Sky River Temple was the name of the organization name of Sky River Great Elder when he was teaching swordsmanship in the past. It also referred to the mountains where the elder resided. Futian came to the Central Emperor realm as a disciple of Sky River Great Elder. Naturally, it was most suitable for him to declare himself as a disciple of Sky River Temple. Moreover, his master was Qi Xiangang, who was indeed a disciple of Sky River Temple. The Tianhe realm. Yuanhong had heard of it before. In the past, a huge conflict erupted between Shen clan and the Tianhe realm. It was caused by that. Could it be that Futian was related to it? Yuan Hong did not dwell on this thought. With a smile, he led his army and left. Here, no one else was contending with Yi Futian now. Only then did Yi Futian look in the direction where Brahma's pure sky was, saying, "Goddess Qin, is your group not planning to take a look at other places as soon as possible?" "We will travel with young Master Yi," Qin He answered with a smile. Yi Futian was stunned. Qin He's eyes revealed a glint of joy. It was enchanting. "But does young Master Yi not welcome us? For Goddess Qin to be willing to travel with my party, it's a hard-to-come-by opportunity," Yi Futian said with a smile while nodding. He did not reject them since it had been his hope to get to know Brahma's pure sky more. With Brahma's pure sky, he still had unfinished business. "Thank you, young Master Yi." Qin He bowed slightly. The virgins from Brahma's pure sky stared at the two of them. Back when they first met at Xiantian Pavilion, if Yi Futian had truly ventured there for Virgin Qin He, and they had ended up together, their love story would have been the stuff of legend. The two of them were a match made in heaven. Clearly, all the virgins from Brahma's pure sky regarded Yi Futian as a suitable husband candidate. Even if their greatest beauty, Virgin Qin He, would have to lower her status to marry him, the rest still thought of them as a good match for each other. The virgins were all impressed by Yi Futian. Before this, everyone had considered Gu Donglu and Zhan Yuan as the most outstanding people among this generation of the heavenly mandate realm. Now, the virgins felt like Yi Futian should instead be regarded as the most exceptional one. Yi Futian knew nothing about their thoughts. His gaze shifted to look at the sword master of Lihan. At this moment, the space surrounding the sword master of Lihan had become a cocoon of swords. Countless sword will crisscrossed and enveloped his body inside the cocoon. The sword will in the entire sword city flowed here. From being very weak, his aura recovered and became even stronger and more powerful. It was as though he could faintly resonate with the endless sword will all around him. The divine sword contained a sword spirit within it. Now, this sword spirit had already fused together with the spiritual soul of the sword master of Lihan, and they had become one. His sword spirit had been reforged, being reconstructed after being destroyed. Right now, the sword master of Lihan himself saw that he had completely entered a certain state. It was as though he had become a sword. He was the center of this world of the sword. He could sense sword will in the entire sword city. It seemed as though his will was everywhere. Yi Futian quietly waited on him. He did not know how long the sword master of Lihan would remain in this condition. Some were calm, and others were in awe of him. They followed Yi Futian and left the place together, hoping that they would also come across other opportunities. "Yaya, would you think badly of me?" Yi Futian asked Yaya, who was beside him, as his group traveled at high speeds across the sky. After seeing the metamorphosis of the sword master of Lihan, he did not know whether Yaya would have any thoughts regarding this. "Will you mistreat me?" Yaya asked as she turned her gaze and looked into Yi Futian's eyes. Yi Futian was stunned. He replied with a smile, "I won't." Yaya shifted her gaze and did not say any more, as though Yi Futian himself already knew the answer. This made Yi Futian speechless. He felt pressure as heavy as a mountain weighing down on him. "Head east," Yi Futian instructed. The purple god rats that had scouted out the various directions discovered that many top forces were traveling in this direction. This place was previously the lands of a realm. Many ruins had been searched by people before. Yi Futian might be able to obtain the things that they had left behind and had not taken away, but for him, these things would not give him any substantial benefit. He went to 2 different places and had guarded the sword master of Lihan for some time. He could not continue to delay any longer. Hence, he was prepared to fly past all the ruins that they passed by along the way and head forward at full speed to the end. Dou Zhao would most likely not have lied to him. His group traveled extremely fast. They were like shooting stars that swept across the sky in God's relic. However, they were not the only ones to do so. Right now, from all corners of God's relic, people were rushing over at full speed. Some of the fastest ones were the top forces of the Central Emperor realm. They had more intel, and they had a clearer goal than those from other realms. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., Please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. What possibility is that? Yi Futian asked. Suppose this god's relic is a single plane of existence, a spherical world like a planet. Then, if we appeared in the same region and then headed in opposite directions, the distance between us would first increase and then decrease, Xia Qingyuan explained. You are right, Yi Futian nodded. Xia Qingyuan's deduction was the same as his. Let us continue on our way. Yi Futian did not say any more. He kept this in mind and continued heading east with haste. The sensations he felt after this also confirmed his hypothesis. The distance between him and the purple gold rats was indeed getting closer. After a long while, an endless wasteland appeared before Yi Futian and the others. The members of the purple gold rat clan that headed in the other 3 cardinal directions were still heading forward in haste. However, Yi Futian already discovered that the distance between them was already very near. Of course, this was relatively speaking. If they continued to head forward, they would end up gathering at one spot. Based on what Do Zhao had described, they would encounter a great relic by heading in one direction. Was it possible that the great relic that they encountered at the end of the 4 cardinal directions was actually the same relic? It was just that nobody knew that it was the same relic? That meant to say that the people who entered God's relic before this had never traversed the entire place? We should be arriving soon, Yi Futian said in a low voice. If Do Zhao's information was not wrong, each direction had a great relic. That meant that it could only be at the intersection point of the 4 cardinal directions. In this place, he could already see the remnants of the will of humans. There seemed to have been a huge battle here before. What is that? Yaya looked into the distance across the barren mountain range. In front of them, they could see a huge golden skeleton standing erect in the wastelands. They sped up and headed over to the giant skeleton. It's a dragon corpse, Yi Futian mumbled. This skeleton was tens of thousands of meters long. Its size was gigantic. Lying here, up close, it was a striking sight to behold. One could imagine how powerful a divine dragon it was when it was alive. Unfortunately, now it was just a pile of bones. However, even as a pile of bones, it still contained intense will. No one has actually taken this away, Luo Yue exclaimed. Take it away? Yi Futian said, why don't you try to take this away from here? Luo Yue was stunned. She took a step forward and touched the dragon bones. She wanted to try and lift one of them up, but she discovered that the dragon bones that stood erect in this wasteland did not budge. She could not lift them at all. A golden divine dragon leaves behind golden bones, Yi Futian explained in a low voice. This one was at the demon emperor level. One single bone is enough to create a Renhuang implement. No one was certain as to whether their gathering was a coincidence, or they had spied on and followed each other here. Yi Futian's arrival attracted the attention of many people. When people from the heavenly mandate realm saw him together with Virgin Qin He from Brahma's pure sky once again, they revealed strange looks. Were the two of them truly not in a relationship? Many people could not help but stare in the direction of Yi Tianyu. However, Yi Tianyu also had an exquisite beauty standing beside him. She was elegant and cool, as expected of Yi Man from Divine Palace. Both Yi Tianyu and Yi Man gave Yi Futian a glance. Then they saw Qin He too. Is that the virgin from Brahma's pure sky? Yi Man asked Yi Tianyu softly. She could more or less guess Qin He's identity. Yi Tianyu nodded. Yi Man examined Qin He carefully. Was this maiden the person whom Yi Tianyu almost married due to the arrangement of the clan? If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.